it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Those Who Came Before by Dremantis. In the mid-2010s, now it's hard to recall the exact year to be quite honest, I was a zoologist working as both a consultant and field specialist for the UN. Well, it was a great job for someone like me who enjoys writing detailed papers, conservationist efforts, and working up close and personal with wildlife. Now, my specialized field of study is herpetology. For those who don't know what that means, it's the study of amphibians and reptiles. Herpetologists are some of the most important, well, when it comes to consultations concerning ecology and environmental impacts that are related to climate shifts and human projects, as amphibians and reptiles are typically the first to show signs of environmental impact, adapting in various ways to suit their new environment, or dying off rapidly. Now, as most people in the world will know, reptiles are typically found in warmer climates. Arid, tropical, or temperate climates typically suit them best. Amphibians favour more humid and warm climates, so while you might not find many amphibians in a desert, where you could still find snakes and lizards, overall you'll find a considerable overlap in the environments lizards and amphibians thrive in. The reason I'm telling you all these otherwise innocuous details about herpetology is because of the strange mission that I was sent on, a field mission to Antarctica. Well, as I'm sure you can tell, Antarctica is far away from the ideal environment that a herpetologist would perform ecological studies in, and there are no known species of reptile or amphibian living on that ice rock. So, why was I being sent? Seeking answers to this nagging question, I approached the head of biology working for the UN, Bill. He was an older gentleman, short white hair, with a hairline beginning to look like the letter M. His facial features were hard and wrinkled from stress and age, but somehow didn't detract from the kind and fatherly demeanour that he had. He wore something between business casual and beach dad. His exact outfit escapes me, to be honest. Now, as far as I can recall, the conversation went something like this. "Oh, excuse me, sir. I had a couple of questions about, well..." "Yes, about your most recent assignment to Antarctica." Now, of course, he already knew my assignment. He was the head of the department. He would have had to have known about the orders and okayed them. "Yes, sir, I'm just a little bit confused. Why would I..." But he cut me off again. Why would a herpetologist be sent for a field study in a place like Antarctica? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, son, I know the questions you've got for me, and I knew you wouldn't go along with it quietly. Well, his nonchalance annoyed me, and his refusal to let me finish my own sentences boiled my blood, but, well, he wasn't wrong. He did know the exact question I had for him. "Oh, come with me, son. The answers to all of your current questions are down in the admin sublevels." "Oh, the admin sublevels? I mean, is it okay for me to go down there?" "Oh, yes. I've already filled out the necessary paperwork for you to be able to accompany me down there, and I even have your temp badge with me." He handed me a badge encased in vacuum-sealed plastic, with a loop at the top to facilitate the metal clip-on tag. I clipped the badge to my shirt pocket, and he clapped me on the shoulder. There, my boy. Now, follow me." He led me to an elevator that was down a long hallway. I can remember thinking to myself, what could be so important that they both need to keep it hidden in the admin sublevels, as well as allowing a field specialist access to the sublevels in order to see it? Well, I mused that there wasn't any point in pondering this, and chastised myself for worrying about a topic I was mere minutes from finding answers to. The elevator hummed as it made its way down from the 3rd floor, where we began our descent past the 2nd, 1st, and basement floors, and into the sublevels. No music was playing, and very little in the way of talk between myself and Bill. Could he tell I was nervous, and picking up on it but staying quiet for my benefit? Or maybe he was just as nervous as I was. The older man's hardened features were somewhat unreadable to me as our descent into darkness continued unabated, and the silence remained unbroken. The elevator finally dinged as we halted, a barely audible sigh of relief escaping my lips. The elevator's analog sign displayed sub-level 12. "Oh, what's on this level, sir?" "Well, you'll find out in just a moment." "No, I didn't mean whatever it is you brought me down here to see. I mean, what is this sub-level for?" Bill eyed me for a moment before shrugging. "Well, you're gonna see it in just a moment, kiddo." And he finished with a laugh. Ain't no harm in telling you. The elevator door opened, revealing a long, pristine white hallway with bright white lights illuminating the entire length. "Well, this here is the lab where we keep top-secret classified specimens for research. And development. Now, I can't let you in to see anything but the specimen that pertains to your expedition. But, well, there's a good chance that when you make it back home, you'll have a big fat promotion waiting for you. So you might not have to wonder about them for long." Then lightly clasped my arm with his gruff hands and gave me a reassuring squeeze before he began to walk briskly down the hall, expecting me to follow. And so I did. He led me down a series of hallways and T-junctions, knowing exactly where he was going and where he was at all times. How he had such a knowledge of these tunnels astounded me, but a man of his experience working with this particular complex, well, it made sense. We arrived relatively quickly at a door marked UKX 101, unknown reptilian tissue. It seemed to be one of the only doors labelled on the outside. I wasn't sure as to the rhyme or reason why. I wasn't left to ponder my query for long, as the door was unlocked and flung open, and I was ushered inside. Inside there was a large storage container, cooled by some mechanism, a locker, and an examination table, along with tools and scalpels. Once the container was opened, I could see a large vacuum-sealed plastic bag. Red tape marked the corners of the bag, and some sort of hazard symbol was marked firmly in the center, a symbol I didn't recognize. "Hey, what's the symbol for?" I asked. "Well," Bill replied in a somewhat concerned tone, "it's a symbol we use for unidentified specimen, biohazard potential. Whatever this is, it doesn't match any species of any animal currently extant, meaning it's either ancient and could potentially contain ancient viruses and bacteria our modern world isn't prepared for, or it could inflict other hazards upon nearby personnel. We really don't know which, if anything, is the case." I nodded at Bill, putting on the PPE stocked in the locker. All in all, a protective gown, a face mask and shield, disposable gloves and thick, disposable long pants that cover the shoes. These were required before we could continue. After donning our biohazard armor, as Bill put it, we opened the cooler once more and removed the plastic bag, bringing it to the examination table. Now, the bag wasn't quite see-through, but I could feel the shape and almost the texture of the object contained within. It was definitely rough and bumpy. Not quite scales, but something similar. We cut open the bag once at the examination table and pulled out the contents. We pulled out an enormous, strangely shaped, clawed appendage about the length of the average human male's forearm. I began my examination, listening idly aloud the qualities that I found noteworthy. It appears to be covered in something similar to scutes or scales. Definitely some sort of dermal or epidermal armor, or heatsink. The claw is about 8 inches in length. I'd need a fragment to perform an analysis, but it doesn't appear to be made of keratin. Strange. I began to flip it over and inspect the opposite side. It was much the same as the reverse, but... Oh, that's interesting. There appears to be a small hollow that terminates somewhere within the claw at the tip. Almost like an oversized needle or fang, but it definitely isn't. Now, this appendage appears to be an arm or leg of some kind. The appendage had thawed slightly, and I noticed the portion of the limb about 4 inches from where the claw began and seemed to slump slightly forward. I wiggled it to confirm my suspicions. It moved back and forth freely. Yeah, this appears to be some kind of ankle or wrist, a pivot point for the appendage. I reached for the scalpel to begin dissection, but Bill grasped my hand firmly, yet not threateningly. Thank you, son, but that ain't your job. We got boys to focus on this. Your job is the expedition. I nodded, yielding to the older man's orders. We packaged the limb up, stored it in the icebox once more, and exited the room. And once we'd left the room, we doffed our PPE and threw it in a biohazard bin. So, what does this have to do with my expedition to Antarctica, sir? Well, he began. This specimen was recovered from an excavation team in the Antarctic permafrost. The team that recovered it wasn't sure what it was, but thought it looked reptilian or crocodilian, so, that's your mission. You and a team of geologists, excavators, and zoologists are being sent to Antarctica, to the site where this unknown species was discovered. Your job is to either find live or dead members of the same species, document and assess them. Now, if you find more, especially intact, remains, you'll also be expected to bring them back here for further study. The preparations for the journey went smoothly. A few weeks' worth of food for our team and the excavators currently stuck on site. A few snowmobiles, winter clothing, I'm sure you get the idea. A portable structure with pre-installed insulation would be airlifted in near the site shortly before our arrival, and that would be where we stayed until the end of our expedition, or until an emergency was called in. The numerous flights from the UN's headquarters were long and boring. I didn't actually arrive in Antarctica until about 2 or 3 days after our initial departure. The weather was bitterly cold. The wind bit at every exposed inch of our bodies, and even through my thick beard as I felt the kiss of ice and snow on my face. We unloaded the snowmobiles from the cargo bay, strapping our supply boxes onto ski-like beds, and then drove off towards our destination. Due to not wishing to disturb the site of our expedition, the portable living structure was airlifted in almost a full mile away from our destination. Once we arrived at what would be our living quarters for the next 2 months, we began to unpack, claim rooms, and settle in. I chose the room furthest from the direction of the worksite, and after unpacking my personal belongings and situating the room to my liking, I decided it would be a good idea to establish communications with the team of excavators, whose small work town was in between our station and the worksite. I bid my colleagues to get some rest, as I didn't expect to be out for very long, and I'd be joining in the respite soon before I drove off on one of the new snowmobiles. Well, there was something strange in the air as dusk fell on the landscape, a sort of electrical feeling in the air. I couldn't quite place the feeling of discomfort I had, nor that strange energy in the air, but the sensation only grew worse as I entered the ramshackle work village. I slowed to a stop right at the edge of the village, walking the machine back and parking it perpendicular to the nearby houses. I saw old, used-up remnants of burned wood in the center of the town. I wasn't quite sure how long it had been there, or the snow had had long enough to cover it after the fire had been extinguished. "Hello?" I called out, hoping the workmen weren't already asleep, or that we'd expected them at the expedition worksite and had headed there. I began to walk through the rudimentary village. As I made my way through the center, I noticed that the crew's motor sleds were parked on the opposite edge of town, in a corner by a much bigger-looking shed than the rest. Was it their headquarters? Well, I wasn't sure, but I could tell that at least most of them were still around the town. I walked up to the larger building and knocked loudly. "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm with the research team sent by the UN. My understanding was that we'd be working together to find out what exactly it was that you dug up out there." The sound of hurried footsteps with an unsteady rhythm sounded from inside the building. Was the person drunk? Or had I awakened them from a deep slumber? "Hey, who goes there?" a voice shouted from inside, muffled by the door between us. "It's Blake Hewitt, UN biologist. And my understanding was that you were told of our expedition and that you were... The man cut me off by opening the door and yanking me inside. He caught me off guard, allowing him to easily overpower me and pin me against the wall just inside the door. "Hey!" I shouted, but he cut me off from saying anything else by cupping my mouth with a hand. His palm was sweaty, though the shack wasn't well insulated enough to be warm, and he wasn't even dressed in warm clothing. He had a wild look in his eyes as he slowly released my face. He then jutted his index finger out and drew it to his lips, hissing a quiet shh. I looked around for a few tense moments, cocking his head at angles, as though we weren't looking for something, but rather listening for something. "I don't think it's out quite yet," he said in a distinct drawl, sounding somewhat like a cowboy trying to impersonate an Australian. "You're a lucky one, boy." He then released me from his grip and began to pace. What? Don't think what's quite out yet?" I asked harshly, rubbing my now slightly sore arm. "What the hell is so Quiet!" He cut me off in a whisper yell, drawing his finger up again. The howl of the frozen wind outside was all that could be heard. After a few moments, though, I heard something that the wind had carried along with it. The noise I heard was hard to describe. It was almost like an opera singer maintaining such a high note it was barely audible to the human ear. As I focused my attention on the noise, however, I could hear slight differences in the note. It was some kind of song, a melody and an extreme pitch, and obviously one no human could possibly be responsible for. It's finally come out for the night," the man said in an almost inaudible whisper. What is it?" I asked as quietly as I could, as the man lowered himself and I to a crouch. "I don't rightly know. All I know is that, Siren, or whatever it is, has been out here for the past 3 nights. Comes from up the mountains, about a quarter of a mile yonder." He pointed discreetly east, in the direction of a small mountain range that ran in a southeast to northwest direction, terminating somewhere over the horizon directly north of us. "You can hear that infernal song, can't you?" I nodded. "I used to be the foreman of this here operation. First night after calling you all in, 2 of my men said they could hear someone singing to them. Something about how whoever was singing had to be out in this hellish snowscape for a long, long time. I told them they was hearing things. Then I started to hear the singing too. But, it weren't words, not like you and I speak. My daddy used to be a fisherman, and his daddy was too. They passed down tales about sirens through generations by word of mouth. Figured it was a myth for the longest time, but, hearing my men say they hear words in that cursed melody. I knew it had to be some kind of siren. So me and the boys dragged them 2 back to town, kicking and screaming, practically frothing at the mouth. I swear, we had to tie them boys up to their own beds. Come morning time, though, them fellas was gone. Ropes weren't cut, broken or untied neither. They was just gone." He sighed and shook his head, slow at first, then rigorously, and rubbed the stubble on his face thoughtfully. "Almost the same damn thing happened the next 2 nights. Last 2 of my boys been taken right out from under me last night. It's like they were possessed. I couldn't drag 'em back myself. We had to bend every effort we could to drag 'em back the first 2 times, but I alone weren't strong enough. Them boys walked off into the freezing death out there. No long johns, no coat, hardly anything but their skivvies. Off into the mountains they went, and they ain't been back yet. Now it's back to..." The singing had stopped, causing the foreman to cut his sentence prematurely. All was dead silent. Not even the icy wind sliced through this silence. We went to make a move towards the back of the lodge, when suddenly a large figure landed on the roof of the shack across the way from our hiding spot. I could barely make out any defining traits, but it was like nothing anyone had ever documented on Earth. On the one hand, I was fascinated by this unknown species, wanting to study it, capture it, do what I'd set out to do. On the other hand, something within me screamed and raged against the confines of my mind. Get away. It felt like a part of me was screaming, get away, get away. The foreman was frozen in place, his face shifting between blissful calm and wild panic almost every instant. He finally settled on calm and stood up. What are you doing? I asked in my own whisper yell. Get the fuck down. He's gonna see you. We don't even know what it is. The foreman ignored me entirely, so I moved as fast as I could from my crouched position towards him. I tried with all of my might to bring him down to my level, and even attempted to yank him down to the ground, but to no avail. Oh, he wants to be let in, Blake, the foreman said in a tone of bordered fanaticism, while his face and demeanor remained perfectly calm. He wants you to know something. I looked out of the window, searching for this he the mad foreman was talking about, but the only thing different about the cold, dead night was that the creature had moved. He was no longer on the building across from us. There was nowhere in the line of sight to any of the windows. I got up quickly as the foreman began to take his first steps towards the door, trying everything from shoving, tripping, hitting. Nothing worked on the man as he continued his relentless march towards the door. A few steps before he reached the door, I dove under a nearby desk, wanting to hide from the eyes I now felt that were constantly on me. The feeling of being watched never left me. I could feel the cold, uncaring eyes gazing at me from every direction. I decided to poke my head out just enough so my left eye could peer around the wall on the underside of the desk. The foreman had finished his robotic walk towards the door and waited for just a moment. A loud thumping noise could be heard outside, like wet earth being struck by a sledgehammer, and the sound of powdered snow could be heard scattering against the outside wall of the building. The foreman now reached for the door handle. Slowly, almost tortuously slow, he turned the handle and opened the door, letting the cold, perpetual winter in, and whatever creature was out there was sure to follow. At first, I couldn't see anything past the possessed madman at the door. And then he began to back up slowly, as I could hear a thumping on the rudimentary wooden floor of the working men's headquarters. The thumps of each step the creature took were followed by a clicking, almost skittering noise, almost as if claws or stray scales were hitting the floor with each step. As the creature came into view from behind the foreman, I was able to behold all of its horrible majesty. The dull grey-green of the creature's skin, the appendages bent at strange angles, too many appendages to make any kind of anatomical sense. The head contained no discernible features apart from what, to a sane mind, would appear to be a mouth, but obviously didn't function that way. It was perpetually agape, but no teeth could be seen within. Only a black and red pulsating mass of flesh. Well, or so I thought, until it opened one of its eyes. The singular, putrid yellow-red orb, glowing within what I'd originally presumed to be the creature's maw, blinked, rolled around rapidly as if scanning the room at a speed the human brain couldn't process, and, in almost half a second of this, settled on the lunatic that let the creature inside in the first place. There was a static charge in the air again, and as though called upon or compelled, the foreman approached this monstrous siren. Once again I was surprised as the mouth eye socket once more proved to be neither. An appendage, horrifically the same as the one I'd examined back at the UN base, protruded from the orifice on the creature's head. The appendage that I once thought to be lined with scales or scutes also proved itself to have neither, instead revealing that it was covered in thousands of tiny eyes, that same horrid yellow-red colour as the large one I saw within the creature's head that first time. The vicious claw extended from within the limb, the entire appendage throbbing as the claw dripped this glistening, disgusting fluid. The nightmarish creature plunged its claw deep into the former foreman's head, making odd, undulating motions across the appendage and causing some sort of spasms within its myriad arms, neck, and strange movements of its head that no human could perform or even describe. The closest I can come to a description is like the picture of an old TV, the static on the screen causing the picture to shift from side to side. Those spasms continued for what felt like hours, but truly only lasted less than 30 seconds. I heard the creature make a strange noise similar to a hum after the spasms abated, and as I gazed upon it, all of the visible eyes on the appendage snapped to the desk that I was hiding under. The mouth, eye, limb retracted into a facial orifice. A voice, coming from God only knows where, surged forth like a tidal wave from this thing, crashing against the foundations of my mind, until, slowly, I was able to make out the words of the creature before me. You, human, your kind has not walked in this place since the dawn of your species. Not since you developed your primitive tools and your animal vehicles. Why have you come here now and doomed your brethren to a life under our care? The voice sounded deep and distorted, as though the very earth shook as he spoke to me. I came my stammered speech. Clearly explain your reasons for encroaching on domains you know belong to us. Do it now. I don't know what you're talking about. What are you? Where could a being like you possibly come from? Did you evolve alongside us on Earth? What are you? I spoke shakily to the thing menacing me from across the room. It now moved in my direction, and the influence it had on me without my knowledge strengthened, and against my will I clambered out from underneath the desk, now standing face to, well, what I assumed to be a face, with a real, ungodly monster. Are you to tell me that not only you do not know what I am, but you never knew of my existence in the first place? Your species has forgotten mine. Your kind doesn't remember that this is where we dwell. The question surged into my mind, not in an orderly fashion, but all at once. It took me a moment to pick through the words and force them to make sense in my mind, and I began answering the questions in the order I forced my senses to perceive. Yes, that's what I'm telling you. I don't know who or what you are, nor that there were more of you. We don't have any historical accounts of your kind, nor that you had laid claim to this part of the earth. Part of? The creature bellowed through my mind, an assault that nearly knocked me unconscious. We do not lay claim to part of the earth, human. This world is ours, by right of the first, by right of the intelligence, and by right of might. We merely can only live in your colder regions, and detest you humans. We tolerate your existence on this planet for various reasons, but the agreement was always that you were to leave our dwellings and never return. My head spun from the sheer volume of rage this creature exuded, and I propped myself against the desk. Steadying myself, I spoke once more. I didn't know. I paused, falling to my knees as I threw what little remained of the contents of my stomach up. Panting, sweating, dazed and exhausted, I remained kneeling before this creature, and it seemed to have a sick satisfaction from this display. We didn't know. We couldn't have known. No record of you exists. No dominant civilization other than ours are in our history books. Look, I'm sorry. I blurted those last words out like the bile that had just moments ago escaped my lips. The creature moved towards me and reared up to its full height. God, it must have been 9 feet tall at the shortest. It extended most of its limbs, and I could almost make sense of the architecture of them, and I could see legs hooked back in digitigrade fashion, but strangely it walked on the soles of its feet. It still had 2 of its sets of arms planted on the ground, hands balled in fists as it rested on its knuckles. The chest of this creature was solid and smooth-looking, with no bones obviously exposed anywhere on its body. The arms it raised into the air swiftly came down around me in a tangled mess, but the creature's grasp on me was firm, almost strangulatingly firm. "Hear me, ape. Tell all of your kind, however you are able, that they are not welcome in this sector of the world, nor the magnetic opposite of this sector. The ones we have captured will be slaves, or food, and you will not have them back. You alone will return, and you will ensure none disturb us again. If you fail to make this happen for us, none of you will be allowed to exist on this planet." The creature's arms began to squeeze tighter and tighter around me. I couldn't escape. I screamed, more loudly, more frightened, and in more pain than I have ever been in my life. "Now, be gone." Those last words seemed like a whisper as I jolted awake, screaming, but alive, and back in my room, back at the complex. I panted as I tore myself out of bed and collapsed to the floor, laughing a joyous laugh, the laughter of life. Well, the laughter soon turned to wailing, crying and rage. But eventually I settled into a mixture of all these emotions and shuddered quietly on the floor. I'm not sure how much time passed before I picked myself up and got dressed, but as I exited my room and explored the complex, I took note it was empty, except for signs of struggle in some rooms, and a few bloodstains which I took to cleaning. So, it definitely hadn't been a dream. Everyone was gone, and I alone had to return to civilization to report this to everyone. I made the call to Bill over a satellite phone that had a spotty connection at the best of times, but oddly enough worked almost perfectly today. I made up some bullshit story about the ice shifting during a blizzard, and it had dragged everyone but me to their dooms. The helicopters arrived within a day. The only things they seemed to really care about recovering were the food items, myself, and the motor sleds. We left the portable shelter behind along with my colleagues, lost to the siren, or sirens, who lived in those mountains. The next few days were a blur in my mind. A few debriefs here and there, some questioning, investigations, and accusations. I avoided being a suspect in the case for their deaths and answered the questions satisfactorily enough to get them to stop. I know I needed to spread the siren's message to the world, but for now I needed to hide it. The only way that would make me sound is like a madman that had murdered his companions. The only one I could trust the information with was Bill, and he believed my story. He thought, though, that I was a fool to take their warnings seriously. We need to organize another larger expedition to that site, son, not leave it alone. And no matter how hard I tried to make him see reason, he wouldn't. Luckily, world crisis after world crisis has delayed the expedition until this year. Well, he didn't want me to spread the message to the world, but I have to. The truth has to be revealed. The UN is planning another expedition to Antarctica, and if they're caught by the sirens, not only will they die, but I fear they might just damn us all by proxy. When they make their plan public, we must bend every effort into stopping that expedition. We must leave those who came before us alone. Well, Antarctica, perhaps the last great uncharted territory on this planet. Who knows? Could be elements of truth there. Who knows what lies beneath the ice? Well, personally, I think we should just leave it alone and not risk anything like this. But hey, Who am I? Just a storyteller. What do I know? Well, that is it for your Friday evening's entertainment. I'll be back again this weekend with something pretty damn good, I can assure you. So, please join me again very soon. Till the next time, my dear friends, have a lovely weekend, sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.